Latvia Weekly presents a look at the Riga City Council Elections, Part 1 in a series. Labdien visiem, and welcome to Latvia Weekly. I am one of your hosts, Joe Horgan, and seated right next to me here in person in Jelgava is Otto Tabuns. It is so nice to see all of you today. Otto, I am so unbelievably excited. I can barely even contain my excitement. I don't know how you feel right now.
Well, I think especially with the music that you chose to open this episode, it will be really enchanting and probably Shakespearean episode this time.
Yes, because as all of you know, because you're either watching or listening to this right now, we are finally going through our look at Riga City Council elections. So for those of you who have listened to the Latvia Weekly podcast before, we do talk a lot about politics. We do talk a lot about, the nuts and bolts. But we've been waiting for quite some time to finally do a full episode about the Riga City Council election. Now, for those of you who know a little bit about this election that's about to happen here in Riga, well, here, we're technically in Jelgava right now, where we're on the outside looking in. It's been called an extraordinary election. And Otto, what's so extraordinary about this election? Why does it have this title? Because, it sounds like some kind of adjective that you use, like, oh, wow, this is going to be an extraordinary election. But you see this in official sources. What's so extraordinary about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's extraordinary in the legal sense, as it is not happening as it usually would have. And that, of course, is due to the Riga City Council, at least the previous one, having been let go by the parliament on the basis on this initiative from the Ministry of Regional Development and Environmental Protection, specifically with regard to the corruption allegations of Mayor Mr. Ushakov's and problems with the management by the coalition in the municipal government that was led by Saskaņa, the Harmony Party, and kalpot Rīgai, the honor to serve Riga.
Yeah, so for those of you who are new to Latvia's political system, so basically Riga, which is the largest city in the country, it's really the city, it's the capital, and has about half of Latvia's population, more or less.
1/3.
Well, yeah, within Riga, but then, within greater Riga as well,
yeah.
Which is, like a big part of the country as well. It's about a half.
Which is one of the reasons why they had the administrative reform, because so many people then moved to the regions adjacent to city. That's right.
Exactly, yeah. So normally what happens here in Latvia with all the municipalities, so every 4 years there is an election for the municipal governments. And the reason, like Otto just mentioned, why this is happening a little bit earlier is a situation which we've gotten into big detail in previously in the episodes, but as Otto mentioned, we had this one mayor of Riga, Niels Ushakovs, who was really kind of the most prominent politician probably in the country for the last 10 years. Somebody who everybody had a very strong opinion about one way or the other. So we're not going to get into him. We did an entire episode about him. You can go back on the Latvia Weekly podcast feed and you can listen to our episode specifically about him and his legacy if you are interested. But whenever, for those of you who are fans of history, whenever there's a great leader, a great emperor who doesn't have a successor named and he leaves for whatever reason, there's always a big power vacuum. And that is what has happened here in Riga. There's been a big power struggle. It's a weird mix of the parties that were elected to Riga City Council had a very hard time making a coalition together. But then there was also pressure by the national government as well for them to resign. And the specific incident was over the, which sounds so bizarre, when you really think about it, it was over the procurement for waste management systems. And they weren't able to make a make a contract that the national government was happy with. So the national government decided to literally take out the trash and reset the election. But then COVID happened. So the election date has been pushed back and back and back and back and back. And now the election's happening not that soon before it would have happened anyway. It was going to happen next early summer, late spring. Now it is happening at the end of August. So for those of you who are wondering, by the way, will this city government last for only 1 year until the next election? The answer is no now, because the national government has actually changed the law. So this government will last all the way until the next previously scheduled election, which is going to be in 2025. And again, the stakes are huge here. The stakes are absolutely huge because we've had a very stable political situation, which is very rare in Latvian politics and Riga politics as well. And now the alliance, which has been in control, has broken up, and it is literally anybody's game right now. It is very, very exciting. So what we're going to do this in a few different parts because there's so much to talk about, and if we did everything, it would be like a 4 or 5 hour episode. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to look at the main parties that are already in power right now. Okay, so we're going to look at the parties that are already in Riga City Council in Riga City Council. We're going to go through their a little bit about their history, a little bit about their platforms. Otto has this amazing graphic that he's created, which we're going to put up also on latviaweekly.com, which puts everything in a great grid. And then also a little bit about some of the candidates who are running as well, because not all of the parties, it seems like, have officially announced who their mayor would be. Yeah. And just a little note, mayor of Riga is kind of a colloquial term because technically it is the... How would you translate Priekšsēdētājs?
Well, it's the chair of the city council. That is what would be the term in the law, and also in Latvian we wouldn't use officially the word mayor because it is not there is not such a word in the Latvian language. You would just have priekšsēdētājs, which is the chairperson, chairman, or chairwoman.
But there's a kind of new foreign loan word, mērs, which gets used a lot. So it's been taken directly from there. So and by the way, for those of you who are watching live right now, you are welcome to ask us questions. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do an episode right now about the parties that are already in power. We're going to do another episode then shortly. We're going to take a little break, and then if you're watching on YouTube later or listening on your podcast app, we're going to split it into a second part where we talk about the challenger parties, the parties that are on the outside looking in, trying to get in. And then next week we're going to do an episode about on the expats in Latvia Facebook page. So many of you who are listening or watching are members of that. People generated questions that we sent to all the parties. Hopefully we will be getting some responses from them, and we will discuss the responses. And then we're going to do a couple more episodes about towards the end of the election, looking at how the election has gone, what the polling numbers look like, and the debates that have happened, and we're going to analyze what's actually happened. So, are you ready to go, Otto?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so the number one party that we have to start with is Saskaņa, okay? And this is a party, so it's kind of interesting how it gets translated into English. So the best translation is usually harmony, but they call themselves Concord in English, officially. So their official name in English is Concord, but literally nobody uses that.
Yes, because probably it does serve as a translation, but probably in English, as far as I understand, would not be probably the most used word anymore.
Yeah. So for those of you who are kind of, pay a little bit of attention to Latvian politics, or you hear your Latvian coworkers talk about politics, a lot of times you hear about this quote unquote Russian party. Okay. And usually they're referring to Saskaņa. Why does it get this label, the Russian party, Otto?
So there are two things why some people would choose to use that label. One thing is that the Latvian Russian speakers, both Latvian Russians and also, for example, Latvian Ukrainians, Latvian Belarusians, who would use Russian as their first language, are, or at least have been usually the core element of their electorate. The other aspect to this is, of course, their foreign policy orientation. They have always been friendlier or wishing to have better relations with Russia than perhaps other parties, even if that meant some concessions, which was also the question with regard to the response to the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and also with regard to the role of Russian language in Latvia, where perhaps this party, similarly to perhaps one other party, have been more closely aligned to the position that we could frequently hear from Kremlin rather from the majority of opinions in Latvia.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned many times on the show before, they had a formal cooperation agreement with Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party, which was extremely controversial, and they ended up dropping. But what's interesting, so they also, if you go to their website, they call themselves a social democratic party. And in European politics, they are a member of the Socialists and Democrats. And so although, it's kind of interesting. So at the beginning, previously, there were a bunch of different smaller parties that competed for the Russian-speaking interests in the country. And Saskaņa is kind of a union of some of them and also some other parties that kind of coag together. They used to be called Saskaņa Center when they were just basically a union of different parties. And then they kind of formalized into a more, one party. They've tried their best to try to drop this label of the Russian party, and they focused. When you listen, you're in Riga right now. I mean, I'm not as tuned into Riga politics, at least in national politics, you don't. They try to emphasize the fact that they're the social democratic party, that they're, and we'll take a look at their platform. We'll see how social democratic they really are in just a minute. But they've tried, at least the way I see it, to move away from some of these hot button ethnic issues about the language, about, citizenship, stuff like that. That's not the top priorities that they focus on, at least anymore. But it's been very hard to drop this label, and they have always come in first place in national elections since the year 2010, or even before that. Was it 2009 when they first came in first place in the national election?
2009.
Yeah, but they've never been able to negotiate with the other parties, because coming in first place, that's great, but they only have 30% of the vote, and we have a parliamentary system here. So although they are the biggest party, the other parties basically refuse to cooperate with them. So they are always kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. However, they have been, basically had a death grip on Riga City Council. You could literally call it a death grip, over Riga City Council over the last 10 years or so. Otto, can you take a look through their positions in this specific election and see what you think?
Certainly. If we speak about Saskaņa, and practically if we speak about all of the parties, most of what they have in their programs is very center to left. So in the European sense, it certainly wouldn't be liberal. It would be more liberal in the American sense.
Yeah.
Or to quote one of the economists that I was taught in the university, Milton Friedman, they're very liberal with other people's money. At least if we would try to calculate how much all of these policies would cost together, that certainly would be a lot. And all of the parties have chosen this center to left, more of a what could be titled a social democratic approach to trying to understand how much of a role the city government should have, and into what domains it should get involved. And if we look at specifically Saskaņa, then in the domain of transit, specifically they have put their attention to roads and continuing the road reconstruction, which has been their strong point, or at least something that they have tried to do for the last 10 or so years. Then if we look towards the realm of environment, then certainly they are very into parks and trees, and also have called for getting back the chief gardener of the city position, and also making Riga greener, which is a big issue that many people in Riga have raised with many political forces. Then if we look at taxes and benefits, then certainly they have been in favor of retaining the public transit discounts. That has been one of the most appealing policies of theirs when they were in power, and so they have also covered the question of other benefits meaning that like some of the city money will go directly or indirectly to subsidize the living expenses of some parts of the society in the city. Then if we look at housing, then we can specifically talk about the apartment building renovation, which is something that has been raised both on national and municipal level, and Saskaņa has been willing to continue with this.
And I just want to cut in for a second. So for people who aren't familiar with this issue, so a massive amount of people, it might even still be a majority, I think.
Could be the case.
Yeah,
yes.
in Riga are living in Soviet-era housing, which is in all kinds of different condition. I mean, I'm living in Soviet-era housing right now, and it's pretty nice. I mean, it's been renovated, and a lot of the when we're talking about renovation, it's usually not completely gutting and structural on the inside. A lot of it is about energy efficiency. But when they do the outside, when they put on this energy efficient material on the outside, it's this kind of like foam, and they paint over it. It also does help preserve the integrity of the building as well, because then it's less weathered and everything like that. So that's what we're talking about. There are quite a few buildings. I mean, my building has been renovated here in Jelgava, and there's financing that's done by the city, by the European government, but there are a lot that are not, as you can see in many of Riga's regions.
Exactly, and as you rightly mentioned, if we talk just about the people who live in apartment buildings owned or administered by the municipality, then our listeners and yours might remember the story that we did about Rīgas nama pārvaldnieks, or the municipal authority in charge of keeping up these buildings. And specifically in these buildings, you would have approximately 200,000 people living there. So even if it is just the public housing renovations, then it is practically at least a third of inhabitants of Riga who may benefit of this.
So this is a big issue. Yeah.
Exactly. And so is also the question of kindergartens and playgrounds, which is also something that they have put as a priority for them.
One of my older students, who's like in their 50s, they were showing me this English book that they had back from when they were a teenager and the end of Soviet times, and there was different sentences that you had to translate, and one of the sentences you had to translate from I think it was English into Latvian was in the near future Riga will have built many more kindergartens. So this is an issue that has never gone away. It's always, every single election, kindergartens are a major issue, because for those of you who have children out there, that unless you are extraordinarily lucky like me and you are some kind of public worker, it is very difficult to get into these public kindergartens, because they're free and they're very nice, but they have a long waiting list.
Yeah, and so for no surprise that we have 10 out of the 15 parties that are running have put some kind of a policy statement in their program with regard to kindergartens.
As they do every single election.
Yeah.
Every single election. And then see how many actually get built.
Yes, but certainly that is also a concern for Saskaņa. And so is also the issue of Latvian and Russian languages, especially with regard to education. Both with regard to courses and also with regard to the language of education in these educational facilities. Then, of course, there is a point with regard to healthcare, especially in context of the epidemiological situation, that they also would like to improve the readiness of city for that. And if we would look at this one other distinction that I saw in the programs of the parties, then the Saskaņa or the Harmony Party has a perspective that would cover all the districts, rather prioritizing the micro districts. That has been the case for other parties.
Mm-hmm. So this issue, just going back 1 second of Russian education, this is something we've talked about in the past. We're going to do a full episode about this before the end of the summer, but Latvia has previously had schools which do teach a significant portion of the courses. So not Russian, language or Russian literature, but for example, math in the Russian language. They'll teach, earth sciences in the Russian language. And this has been a very hot button issue. This is something that is one of the major issues that parties fight about, because in general in Latvia, as you will see, through these platforms. Generally, parties tend to be less, based on concrete ideology. Like you have like a progressive party, a conservative party, a liberal party, and tend to be a lot more populist and based on ethnic distinctions. As unfortunately you will be seeing pretty soon.
Certainly, as language is the key moment of identity. At least it is in Latvia, where also within different ethnic groups, you might have, let's say, different religions and other aspects. So language would be the identity element number one.
And before we move on from Saskaņa, the main $1 million question, when Saskaņa came into power, it was on the heels of Mr. Niels Ušakovs, who was at the time a very popular journalist. He was a very well-known person. He was very young. He was early 30s, wasn't he, or late 20s? I think he might have even been 29. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was either very late. I mean, he was basically our age. He came into power very young, very energetic, and everything. And people, again, either loved him or loved to hate him. And he has been in the center. After the corruption scandals, which we will again not get into, he is now in European Parliament, and he is not running in this election. And the mayor, candidate who is running, he is not a name that is extremely well known among the general public. The big question is, how much of Saskaņa is Niels Ušakovs, and how much of Saskaņa is an actual, grassroots organization that they've been able to build with the community? And that is a question which all of the political scientists are answering right now. Otto, as a political scientist, what's your prognosis? Do you think that they will be able to have success without Mr. Ušakovs at the fore?
Well, I think that they will certainly have certain success. At the same time, certainly they will lose a lot due to Mr. Ušakovs departing, as he has been the spokesperson, the first image of the party, and a part of his success due to his young age, due to his ability to communicate as a former journalist. And I think they will certainly lose the political capital as a result. I would say that that certainly risks them losing the chance to get in coalition. At least it will be much harder without Mr. Ušakovs. And it was also acknowledged by him when the new candidate for the mayor of Riga was chosen, which was that, that is Mr. Konstantins Čekušins, whom the media have associated with his support to the so-called Russian schools. That certainly that is a good achievement and great courage that it was possible to find a solid candidate and for Mr. Let me read it right. So Čekušins to choose to go on this path, because it certainly won't be easy.
And I'll just say, I mean, Otto is somebody who is very, very connected in with Riga city politics. So the fact that, this is not a name that has captured the imagination over, the last 10 or 15 years, the same way Mr. Ušakovs has. So it'll be very interesting to see. Now, moving on from Saskaņa, finally, so we one of the reasons we spent a little bit longer on Saskaņa than the others is because I also wanted to just give a little bit of background on some of the issues. So now that we've understood some of the issues, we can kind of go through a little bit quicker. We have Gods kalpot Rīgai. And this is, for me personally, the most interesting party in the entire election, because I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen here. So this means, in English, honor to serve Riga. And this was a project that was started by Mr. Andris Ameriks, but it goes back a little bit further than that. So back in the 2011, was it the 2011 election? There was, so Latvia has a few major, or at least it had, they're not so powerful anymore, a few major kind of businessmen, oligarchs who, were in control of different business interests. And there was one, Mr. Schlesers, who started a party. He called it the Reform Party. And what he did was he took a bunch of different kind of political has-beens, so some big name political has-beens, and made this party together. And it was fairly successful in Riga city elections. It was not at all successful in Riga national politics. And one of its most successful members was Mr. Andris Ameriks. And so he basically decided, well, I don't need the rest of these guys. And he started his own party, Gods kalpot Riga. So it was born out of that. And then he more or less kind of hitched his ride together with Mr. Ušakovs together, as they had already had like a little bit of political cooperation before. And over the last 10 years, they were seen as mostly the same thing. Kalpot, Rīgai, and Saskaņa, because they always ran together on the same ticket, as a lot of parties do when it comes to local elections. It's less common in national elections for them to run together on the same ticket, but in local elections, it's very, very common. And so they've more or less been together. Now, what happened when Mr. Ushakov's and also Mr. Amerik's, so they were basically Batman and Robin of Riga. They were the dynamic duo. Mr. Ushakov's was the mayor. Mr. Amerik's was the vice mayor. They went to European Parliament together on the same ticket, and they left. And almost immediately, there began a very messy divorce between Saskaņa and Kalpot Riga, because Kalpot Riga said, no, we're no longer happy being second banana. We want the next mayor. So they had two mayors in a row. It's kind of like the monkey paw. You know, if you guys know the the fairy tale of the monkey's paw. You know, you make a wish and then it ironically gets granted. So they got two mayors in a row. They got Dinas Torlais and then also what was his name?
Oleg Burovs.
Oleg Burovs, yes. But both of them lasted for months. One of them was literally less than a month. The other one was about 2.5 months, if I believe correctly. And then the button got pressed and there was a reset. So the big question is, how viable are they going to be as a separate entity? Because they're not running on the same ticket as Saskaņa anymore.
They are certainly not. At the same time, I think the events after letting go Mr. Ushakov's showed that actually Saskaņa could not have done without honor to serve Riga. They would not have gotten the majority as they did. And like when they split up, you remember, I think Saskaņa had only 16 seats, so they were in no capacity to lead anything. One of the strengths of this party, Honor to Serve Riga, is that you have, one term for them could be has-beens. At the same time, you would have people that have name recognition, who have been in different leadership positions on different committees and organizations for a long time, which means that they have the experience and also the political ability to maneuver in the city council, which probably would help them better for a long time. But specifically, if we look at the policies, then it perhaps also goes together with this fact that they have had a lot of members and representatives being in charge of different committees and different domains already in the city council. So if they talk about transit, they have outlined all of the aspects, starting from accessibility, bike lanes, roads, bridges, trains, also regional transport and parking availability. Also, of course, not forgetting parks and trees, which is an interesting thing which still binds them together with the Harmony Party, is the question of anti-corruption, which has been an issue for at least 5 other parties that are running, but Kalpot Rīgai has not raised that issue at all.
And so just not to put two and two completely together, but both Saskaņa and Kalpot Rīgai's members who have been in city government, there's quite a few who are under corruption allegations, and specifically the former mayor of Riga as well. So that's not a huge surprise.
Yeah, and if we go further, like to taxes and benefits, then of course it is the question of public transit discounts that they are in favor of keeping, the question of expanding social services, and also an important element, teachers' salaries. So they're pledged to increase teachers' salaries, and partially it may be connected with the fact that among the candidates, in this case I have to mention this, they actually have a number of directors of Riga schools. So it is also the way how they're working together with the people that are in Riga in one or another way for a long time, and perhaps also a way how to try to rally the very many educators that work for the city of Riga needs.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because both Saskaņa and Kalpot Rīgai, they do have a number of directors of schools, as my wife knows very well, who is a teacher in Riga. So there is a connection there. I wouldn't say any kind of particularly odious connection or anything like that. I mean, I don't think they're using them as breeding grounds for new voters or anything like that.
Well, probably not, but certainly if there are like some questions with regard to money that go towards your school,
Yeah,
because
that more.
at least I know in the case of city of Jelgava that the biggest part of the city budget is education.
Yeah.
And so I would assume that also in the city of Riga you would have a lot of money that Riga is using to subsidize some significant part of expenses that the schools have. So
Yeah.
that is certainly
Not all schools get the same budget, certainly.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that is also a useful political strategy.
Yeah.
So if we look at housing policies, then certainly they are in favor of keeping and expanding public housing, the courtyard renovations, the apartment building renovations, also in favor of extending playgrounds and sports fields. If we look at economy, they certainly have outlined tourism and importance of this. Also the question of kindergarten, so they're also one of the 10 parties that are in favor of giving like more resources to that. Then if we look at identity, they have given more attention to Latvian language, which probably is one of the major issues that now makes them separate from Saskaņa party, and probably has been one of the issues that the two parties have been in different opinions of. And then, of course, they have given this attention both to districts and micro districts, and have specifically mentioned citizen involvement in defining some of the goals and spending of some of the resources in the city.
Yeah, one last thing before we move on from Kalpot Riga, a very interesting kind of tidbit was that so Saskaņa has generally participated in the 9th of May celebrations, which are very controversial here in Latvia because the 9th of May means completely different things to completely different people. For some people, it means the end of World War II and the victory over Nazism. For a lot of other people in Latvia, it means the beginning of the permanent Soviet occupation that lasted for basically a half century. So celebrating it has always been very, very controversial. It is not an official state holiday, but there are political parties that do take part in it. And very interestingly, Kalpot Rigai's de facto leader at the time, Mr. Burovs, when he was mayor, he said that they would no longer take part in the celebrations, that he would not go there. So, it's interesting. They, have been trying to, kind of make a little bit more of a clean break, but we'll see what happens because it is really anyone's game. I'm very curious to see what happens. Okay, so now moving on to the second place winners of the last election, and very somewhat surprising because this was a party that was pretty much new at the time. And that was not extremely well known. So this is Jaunā Konservatīva Partija, the new conservative party, or the young conservative party, you could also call them as well.
Exactly. And they have also tried to put a well-structured program with specific goals, such as the other parties. And if we look at transit, then we can see like this difference that in contrast like to Saskaņa and to Kalpot Riga, so this balance between specifically roads and like all other means of transit, they have indicated the priority with regard to accessibility, like to pedestrians, the bike lanes, roads as well, but also the question of trains. That has been a big priority of theirs with regard to the municipal transit. And then if we go on to management, they have outlined specifically the issue of policing, that there should be more policing and increased order in city, as well as limitations to gambling. That is one of their policies that I think already previously they have indicated that would be something that they would be feeling strong about. And so now they have the chance in this election. With regard to environment, they have mentioned air quality and, of course, the question of parks and trees. Then if we talk about taxes and benefits, then, of course, they have covered the question of real estate tax, benefits, and public transit discounts, all of which apparently will be, they would like to try to deal with in a way beneficial to the residents of Riga. Then quickly looking at housing, they're also in favor of keeping and expanding public housing and providing apartment building renovations. Then with regard to economy, a priority of theirs is employment and new job opportunities. With regard to family, they have indicated both the total family support, different measures with regard to that, the kindergartens issue, and also support to seniors. With identity, it is, of course, more strong, the the more strong emphasis on the Latvian language, and also they have mentioned their ideas with regard to cultural objects and facilities and events, as well as this importance of all different districts of Riga rather than just the micro district.
Yeah, just a little bit of background on them. I don't want to get into a massive history on all these parties, but so they were very successful in the last election for two main reasons that I can identify. One of them is that generally when you have elections here in Latvia, the kind of campaign advertisements that you see these huge billboards, these huge posters that have these pictures of these, kind of old white men, giving their names, with no information about why you should vote for them. Just, hey, look at these beautiful old, grandfathers. And that is, and you do have these kind of like, negative ads, this and that, and this and that. What kind of made YKP stand out for me a little bit last time is that you actually saw, people on the streets. You saw people come up to you, explain why you should vote for them. You saw a lot more outreach than you generally do in a lot of these other parties. So I wasn't very surprised when they actually kind of surprised everyone. I didn't think that they would do as well quite as they did and, come basically in second place, but I did think that they were, at the very least going to, make it onto city council, because you do need at least 5% of the vote to get onto the council. And then also they had a very charismatic leader, Miss Uristrice, who tragically died recently, just a few months ago after an illness. She was, a little bit of a polarizing figure, but somebody who was involved in anti-corruption previously, and that was their major focus of that election was anti-corruption. So although they're called the Conservative Party, they might have called themselves the Anti-Corruption Party because that was their main focus last time. Would you say it's as much of a focus this time for them based on their platform, their campaigning?
I think that it's certainly a part of what they would try to do with regard to calling for auditing and trying to deal with some of the previous policies that they are not happy, that they do not find transparent enough. At the same time, it is probably now more balanced with having all the other policies, especially the question of family support, the question of kindergartens, which is probably a bigger issue on a municipal level, at least in the minds of many voters, than it is on the national one.
Okay, well, we are going to move on now. So this one is a bit of a mouthful because we have quite a long name right here. Nacionālā Apvienība, Latvijas Reģionu Apvienība. And so at first it looks like this is kind of two separate parties, but it's even more complicated than that. So let's start with the Nacionālā Apvienība part. So Nacionālā Apvienība, the word Apvienība is basically union or association. Like there's a few different synonyms that you could translate it into. But basically this is a group of various parties that have more of a national bent to them. When you hear them talk about in foreign media, very often they're talked about as some kind of far-right party. I wouldn't quite go that far because
neither would I.
Yeah, because they certainly have far-right elements within the party. Because again, it's a diverse group of different parties, different groups. There were some members of the party who were kind of infamous in earlier times when they were younger for definitely having a far-right bent. But generally, when you think of these kind of far-right parties, they generally tend to be very Eurosceptic, for example. They tend to be more extreme, and they really haven't been. They've been in coalition for, again, almost, about 10 years in the national government. And they really, although they've taken generally a hard stance when it comes to language, and, they always, will focus on, why is Latvian public radio playing so much, music in foreign languages? Why aren't they playing it more in English? And, they'll focus on the issues, they'll focus on, for example, schools. Yeah. Well, why aren't they? Of course, more in Latvian. Yeah. They want more foreign language, of course. They've pushed very hard on moving more quickly, transitioning towards, Latvian only education. So yes, they have these hot button issues, but they, I wouldn't quite call them, like far right in the European context where we understand in some of the other countries around us.
Because they do have the two forming parties, the Visu Latvijai, which is the newer one, and Tēvzemei Brīvībai, LNNK, which is the older one, which was in the scene when we regained our independence. And so between them, you have the moderate wings, and also people with some more radical opinions with regard to some specific issues.
Yeah. So then we also have Latvias Reģionu Apvienība, which is a very interesting little group of parties. So in just about every single Latvian city in the country, there is some kind of minor little party where their major political stance is that our city should get more money. And, of course, that's not their only stance, but that's kind of their major stance. And nationally, quite a few of them are members of this national organization, Latvias Reģionu Apvienība, which is the, Union of Latvian Regions, or, again, one of the, big threats to them has been the regional reform, because there's a lot of, smaller municipalities where the big parties basically just don't even bother because, there's, like 20,000 people who live there, and it's just too expensive to really have a big campaign. So now that there's going to be less municipalities and bigger ones, the bigger parties are going to actually start campaigning. So they are very this is a critical election for them. They did not get into the last national parliament. They were fairly successful in the last city election. And they were running together with Latvijas Attīstībai, weren't they?
Yes.
Yes. So they were running together with another party, which we'll get to in just a minute. So basically together, okay, so I'm not surprised that they've hitched their wagon to another party because, the strength in numbers certainly, and I wouldn't be surprised if they, aren't a party that exists anymore in the next 5 years or so. Together with this platform, what have they come up with, Otto?
So if we talk about transit, they have also indicated the importance of almost all sectors other than bridges and parking. So they would probably also be very involved in giving resources to dealing with this infrastructure. Then they have indicated the importance of anti-corruption measures as well as increased policing to increase the order and attractiveness of the city, not only for local residents but also for visitors. Then if we look at environment, then they have mentioned the issues of air pollution and recycling of waste. So dealing with both of them, meaning increasing the air quality and actually instituting a recycling policy in our city. Then if we talk about taxes and benefits, they have specifically indicated about increasing social services. With regard to housing, they have also indicated the important position that public housing has and the policies that they would like to continue, something that they share with many other parties. Then if we look at economy, that has been a major point of theirs. They have covered investment, entrepreneurship, and tourism as major priorities should they have a stakehold in making the decisions at the council level. Then also with regard to identity, no surprise, it is the importance of Latvian language, and also they have covered the issue of cultural heritage, healthcare, and importance of all districts and their participation in decision making.
Mm-hmm. So we will see how they do. Now, they have had, there have been mayors from constituent parties of the National Alliance in Riga previously, so as members of coalitions. Yes. So, it's not completely, outside the range of possibilities, but we will see what happens with these guys. And I'm specifically, again, very curious to see what happens with Latvias Reģionu Apvienība, especially because the next national election, believe it or not, is 2 years from now. It just feels like we just got finished with the last one, but
so I think we'll be employed heavily with that.
Yes, absolutely. So moving on from them, now this is one of the most interesting parties in the upcoming election because so we are counting them as having existed in the previous Riga City Council election, but sort of. okay? Because you see that there's 3 slashes here, okay? So the first slash, Latvia's Attīstībai. So they ran in the last Riga City Council election together with Latvia's Reģionu Apvienība. And Latvia's Attīstībai, so this was a political party that we would consider in America somewhat libertarian. So generally, in terms of hands-off when it comes to government regulation and pro laissez-faire, free market, that kind of thing. And then Kustībai Par, okay, which was a very new political organization. So they are fairly, you could say progressive, I would say.
Yes, so center-left.
Yeah, center-left, more towards the progressive side. So when it comes to the politics, like something somewhat similar to like the Democratic Party, I would say in the United States.
Yes.
Again,
and probably a more social democratic, to use the European term.
So in broad strokes, okay. So please don't jump down my throat right now, because I know somebody, some people are probably about to do this. And I'll explain why in a second. So Attīstībai Par, so they ran together in the national election. They were very successful. They tied for 3rd place with Nacionālā Vienība. Sorry, I just had a brain meltdown for a second. And they have tried their best to kind of capture this center-left vote, which there is. There does exist. I mean, in general, Latvian politics tend to be more conservative, for a number of reasons. But they were pretty successful in the last election for the national election. They had a platform which was the platform to end all platforms. There was probably something written about almost any single issue you could possibly imagine, and it was just I don't know who in the world wrote that or did it, but it was very, very comprehensive, and it was pretty impressive. And then I did in the last for the previous election, I called them a Frankenstein party, and I got attacked by quite a few Attīstībai Par members because for me it's hard to imagine a very libertarian party and like a center left party being able to mingle but it does this is more of a European phenomenon because in the UK you have the Liberal Democrats, which are they seem kind of similar to when it comes, they're in the same union, in European politics. But in American politics, this is very kind of hard to imagine. Yeah. And then the last one, Progresīvie. Otto, do you want to explain?
Yes. So before that, I wanted to mention that for our listeners and viewers, please do not take that in bad faith of what we are saying. We might call like one party, like the Greens and Farmers, like the Godzilla party, or the other one, the Frankenstein party. Even if we may use some epithets like these, that only shows that as with like many political forces that survive through elections, they really remind of some superheroes that you would have in comics. So we use that just in good humor.
No, I mean, we're
you will
trying to
understand that in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying our best to be objective, objective analysts. And I'm trying my best to rib the parties in different ways.
Exactly, as neither of us are member of any of them. Which
No.
allows us to do that with great ease and also with less accusations than some others.
Yes, but hey, we're going to be attacked anyway. We're going to be told that we were supporting this party or the other, whatever. So come at us.
Of course.
So Progresīvie.
In response to your question, so Progresīvie is also a rather a new party. They similarly like Kustība Par, the movement forward. They also started like a movement, and the key elements of their policies or ideology have been green and left ideas. So green and social democrat ideas, as well as I would say if we talk about civil rights, then a very liberal approach in contrast to some other forces. Mm-hmm. And they tried to run for the national election. They failed there. They also failed for the European Parliament. But now, apparently, they have decided to go together with Latvijas Attīstībai and Par and try to get in the Riga City Council, which has been, at least for Progresīvie, the Riga municipality has been where the core of their electorate resides. So that might give them perhaps better chances, at least in their thinking.
Yeah, and again, the progressive vote in Latvia is a small one, as we saw in the last election. So although they did do fairly well on social media and among younger people, they made quite a bit of inroads. They did not come close to the 5%, unfortunately for them. But anyway, so the platform, Otto. How's it look?
Yes. So if we talk about transit, then of course you would have priorities such as accessibility, bike lanes, roads, and also trains. Then with regard to management, anti-corruption is also important goal for this group of parties. Then with regard to environment, they have outlined a number of points, including the question of air quality, parks and trees, so making Riga greener, as well as instituting recycling of waste. Then, with regard to taxes and benefits, they have covered the issue of social services and the need of increasing them. And with regard to sports facilities and playgrounds, that is also something that they have outlined as a priority when improving infrastructure in the city of Riga. Then, if we look at the field of economy, they have put and outlined issues such as employment, investment, entrepreneurship, as well as the image of the city, which is also something that not many other parties have dealt with. The only other party that has mentioned it explicitly has been the New Unity Party. Then also with regard to family support, then is also the question of kindergartens and support to the senior citizens. Then they have also put their policy with regard to immigration and also the teaching of English starting from grade 1, which is also going back to education, and the use of language is also something that makes them different from other parties.
Which a lot of schools are doing already, from what I understand. But it's not an official national policy.
Yeah,
still.
and I think also it is
surprising.
not the case in all schools of Riga, which is something that they might try to achieve. Then, of course, they have also mentioned the question of culture and the importance of putting resources to it. Also, the question of healthcare and the importance of development of all districts rather than just micro districts. And so here, this involvement and also the question of healthcare also makes it a little bit parallel to their national program.
And it would be impossible to talk about the final party, which we are about to get into, without talking about, kind of a coda to Attīstībai par. So they, again, there's new parties that spring up that die all the time. Again, I love longtime listeners of the show are probably sick of hearing the statistic over and over and over again. But there is not a single party from 1998. The 1998 election, or at least a configuration of parties, because again, you see Attīstībai par Progresīvie, they move around and everything. There's not a single configuration of parties that existed in 1998 that still exists in the same configuration, in this election, the last election. They move around a lot, but a lot of times it is the same, a lot of the same leaders, a lot of the same politicians who move from one party to another. And from both Attīstībai, but specifically par, a bunch of people moved from a party called VIenotībā, which has now been rebranded as Jaunā VIENOTībā. So, I didn't explain, by the way, real quick. Attīstībai is development, like for development. Par is like for. Progresīvie is, surprise, surprise, progressive, like the progressives, basically. Jaunā VIENOTībā means new unity. And so this party unity came together in the late 2000s, early 2010s. This was a group of a few different Latvian political parties that were, again, center-left, center-right, that came together in this kind of one mega party under Valdis Dombrovskis, who was the longest-serving Latvian prime minister in history. He served for a glorious 4 years altogether. And it still wasn't from one term to another, from one regularly scheduled election to another. There's never been a Latvian prime minister who served from one regularly scheduled election to another, believe it or not. So VIenotībā, they got into some very hot water, as any Latvian political party that has been in power generally does at one point or another, specifically under the leadership of Solvita Abultiņa, who was she was the speaker of Saima, very controversial figure. She picked a fight with Latvian pensioners. She hollered at them, which became very famous YouTube parodies and everything like that. And just in general, since there were so many different constituent parties, it was a recipe for chaos and a big messy divorce. And so back in the 2017 Riga City Council election, they were just about as on the ropes as they could possibly be. There was a question of would they even get into Riga City Council election at all, and would they even make it until the next election? A bunch of people jumped ship to other parties, specifically, quite a few went to PAR. And what was interesting the last election, so VIENOTībā has generally always tried to be this kind of centrist party, and they've sort of recaptured that in the last election. So they were able to survive, this name change, which is always kind of like this desperate Hail Mary. Whenever you put "new" in front of something, like "New Coke," it's like, oh, come on, But they actually did survive, and Krišjānis Kariņš from Jaunā VIENOTībā is the prime minister of Latvia, even though they were the smallest party that was elected into city council. But at the into parliament. But at the time, they actually took a pretty hard nationalist bent when, at least in some of their campaign materials, which was very interesting for me to read as a Riga resident. They had this one pamphlet that compared their mayoral candidate at the time, Mr. Čiršis, with Mr. Ushakov's, showing how one was a very patriotic person, the other one was this kind of like a fifth columnist type person, which was very kind of surprising for me, because that wasn't the kind of rhetoric that VIENOTībā used in the past. So is Jaunā VIENOTībā different? What do we see from Jaunā VIENOTībā this time around when it comes to their platform motto?
So when I read their program, it perhaps reminded me of a similar thinking or the similar approach, what they would put in when putting together the program or the plan for the government, because it was also very structured and had several very specific points. If we talk about transit, then they have also covered all issues other than parking, starting from accessibility up to regional transit. That has been important for them, and so has been the issue of anti-corruption and policing, which they would also try to improve, or should they get a leading position in the council. Then if we talk about environment, of course, parks and trees and making Riga greener is also a priority for them, as is for many parties who have responded to complaints from citizens of Riga. Then if we talk about taxes and benefits, they have covered the issue of real estate tax, which is, of course, a national issue, as our listeners and viewers would know. Then also they have raised the issues of increasing social services, and also the question of teacher salaries, also like Gods kalpot Rīgai, trying to get attention from that part of electorate. If we talk about housing, then they have outlined all of the policies, starting from support to public housing, and in dealing with this row towards getting a municipal apartment. Then also the question of courtyard renovations, apartment building renovations, the question of playgrounds and sports fields and facilities. That is also all of the things that they are in favor of. With regard to economy, as I already mentioned, image is important for them, as it was for Attīstībai, PAR and Progresīvie, and so is the question of tourism, investment and employment, so that Riga would get back from the crisis. Then if we talk about a family, then of course it is kindergartens. And if we talk about culture, they have also mentioned the importance of cultural objects, events and infrastructure, as the importance of citizen involvement, and also attention to pets with regard to walking facilities or stray animals.
So that just about does it now for all of the parties that were successful in the last election. So what we are going to do now, we are, for those of you who are watching this live on Facebook Live, we're going to take a short break. And for those of you who are listening on YouTube or your podcast app, we hope that you join us for part 2 of this look at the parties. We're then going to look at the parties that are challenging, ones that are not in Riga City Council but would like to be. But again, thank you guys for listening with us. This has been a ton of fun so far. I can't wait to do the next ones.
Oh, yes.
Again, we do not support one party or the other. Certainly over any other. A little bit of listener feedback I can read real quick. So one person wrote to us: as our political system evolves, we're getting quite ideological. Parties, Progresīvie are hardcore Scandinavian social democrats. So I don't know. Would you agree that Progresīvie are hardcore Scandinavian social democrats based on their platform?
Well, I would say that certainly they have some shared ideals, and this Nordic direction, the Scandinavian approach, has been something that they raised with regard to their ambition for the national election.
Mm-hmm.
Well, similarly, we could also discuss the YKP, the Young New Conservative Party, trying to institute more of a conservative approach. Also, as indicated by at least by their approach in supporting family and the family values and some other traditional conservative points. That I'm not saying
not
that
when it comes to spending.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not telling that all of them are
spenders.
Successful in this, but certainly since the last national elections, we could partially agree to our commenter that we could see a little bit more of ideology, at least in rhetoric and at least in the principles that they have wanted to achieve. Of course, when you get into a parliamentary system, when you have to make compromises, then it's of course difficult. But at the same time, certainly some changes could have been observed.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I would agree that we are starting to get more ideological parties, and we definitely saw that in the 2018 parliamentary elections. But again, like you had the New Conservative Party, they call themselves conservatives and everything, but then, the very first issues that they get into, when they got elected were, not, these hot button conservative issues. It was like the director of the University of Latvia, this and that. They got into some kind of strange issues, and then they have supported some pretty heavy spending measures. But again, there's always compromise. You always have to do it.
Well, probably now that could speak to a benefit of the argument that they are conservative is now their stance with regard to real estate tax, so the private property and the role of that.
Yeah.
So once you deal with all the other quarrels or battles that you choose to fight, then perhaps there is also more time and energy to deal with other issues more closer to the heart.
Yeah, well, we'll see. They're very interesting to me because in the last, I should have mentioned this earlier, in the 2018 election, they came in second place, tied with KPVLV, which we'll be getting into in just a minute, for those of you who are watching live. But I can't get a pulse on how voters feel about them anymore, and it'll be very interesting to see how they do in this election. We have one more comment again about Jaunā Konservatīva Partija. So Jaunā Konservatīva Partija also benefited from the protest vote. They got the quote-unquote populist national unity voters, much like KPVLV got the protest vote from Jaunā VIENOTībā and ZZS. Would you agree with that analysis? I don't know if I do.
Well, I would say that always you would have the impact of protest vote. If you would have no opposition to the current establishment, we would have the same parties as we had in 1990, and it has never been the case. Well, partially it is certainly true. It could be both with regard to the ability of the other more established parties to get what they want, which of course is difficult if you have a small faction in the parliament, and of course that is also the belief of something new and hope and change. We know how that worked in the United States. So it could be both your ideological wish to vote, so it could be also your dissatisfaction with what you already have. Certainly, it must have played some part in that.
I mean, I guess it just gets into your definition of what the protest vote is, because for me, a protest vote is specifically, I'm doing this to stick it to the other parties. And I would agree that there were some people who voted for KPVLV, specifically, for that more than for YKP. I don't like. I have a hard time imagining that there was a ton of people in the Riga City Council election who are like, oh, I'm going to do these guys because screw the other guys. And also,
I would say that. Well, I could see at least. Well, probably. I would not argue that it was the decisive part of the vote, but certainly I think you know the story. So Mr. Bordans previously was a member of National Alliance.
Yeah.
And so it was the question that after they had a pretty bad divorce, so he was the Minister of Justice with them, then they could not deal with something. They had to split ways. And I would say that certainly some supporters in the National Alliance who did not enjoy that would have certainly decided to vote for the new Conservatives with following Bordans as like a political leader that they like.
I just have a hard time imagining that it was as widespread as like the protest vote for KPV, which I think there was definitely a stronger protest vote for that.
Certainly.
But anyway, that just gets into nuts and bolts, and it's probably not very interesting for most listeners out there. So we will finish it for here right now. So thank you guys so much for listening. We hope that this has been interesting. So you can go to latviaweekly.com. Otto, a little bit later, will have uploaded his fantastic table that you can look through and see visually what the different parties support according to their platforms. We will have our look at the challenger parties in just a minute, and then we will be back next week, hopefully to discuss the answers that the parties have given to the questions that you have submitted to them. So take care, everyone, and for now, Visu Labu.
Visu Labu.